should be able to harvest that for silage now. We have a lot of... I don't actually know how many hay bales we got. I got one small one for some reason. And then all the big ones. So that should mean I can use 2 big bales rather than 3 small ones. So long as it doesn't push the silage content too low. And I have to be careful about the straw at the moment. I've got to cook up a batch of TMR for the cows anyway. Although I tend to wait till they're 3/4 through it, because we now have a 40,000 or over 40,000 litre mixer. So that's all lots of stuff. That's not quite a full. I think their full thing is about 50,000. So 40,000 is... It's enough to top it off once. So I only have to fill it once. But they're not that far through it, high horses. Yeah, they need to get down to about here. 15,000 before I worry about them. My horses' names. We've got Zeke, Jupiter, Ember, Olympus, and Odin. Let's see. Okay, well, back to there. There's the plane going around again. Now, later on today, it's not going to be a good day for flying, because there is going to be quite a lot of snow falling out of the sky, which makes things difficult to see. But at least at the moment, the roadways are clear, so you can see the runway. But once it starts snowing, that will very quickly become concealed under a layer of snow, surrounded by a layer of snow. And also, we're expecting wind gusts up to 30, 40 miles an hour. And you do not want to fly a light plane in that. I think the planes I used to fly were rated up to 15 miles an hour, but good grief, you needed to be an expert pilot to fight them onto the ground. I could do up to about 8 to 10. Unfortunately, most of the airfields I flew out of had 2 runways. So if the wind speed got over 8 miles an hour, they'd change to the alternate runway. They had one main runway and a secondary. So you would switch to the secondary any time that the wind got over 8 miles an hour. But my last lesson I took out of, I believe it was Santa Barbara. And that's like almost landing on an aircraft carrier. It's just a flat top of a hill. So it's completely open to the wind no matter which direction the wind is coming from. And flat as a pancake and raised above everything around it. And I was just flying out of there. They had a horrible crosswind that was approaching 10 miles an hour. I could not get that plane on the ground. It was fighting me all the way. So eventually the flight instructor said, "Oh, do you want me to land it?" I said, "Yeah, this is way too much for my skill level." But every other airfield I flew out of had a crossfield runway. So I could land, actually Camarillo and Oxnard didn't, but midday, Camarillo and Oxnard, you're getting, the wind is coming in from the coast. So it's always in exactly the same direction and exactly straight down the length of the runway. What most airfields do, they have the predominant wind direction, and that's their big runway. Whenever they, obviously in the past, whenever they built a new airfield, they would look at the which direction does the wind mostly come from, and that's the direction the runway was built. And then they'd make a decision, do we want an alternate runway, and if we do, should we, it'll be across the field. You only ever have one runway in use at any time, but until you get to the big airfields where, places like Heathrow have 3 runways, or 3 runway directions. It's like a triangle, but they might actually have 6, where you have 2-3 right, 2-3 left sort of thing. And then one of those will be for takeoff and one of them will be for landing, which increases your ability to operate. All the airfields I've flown out of are small, so you only have a single runway in any given direction. And so if someone's taking off, you can't land. And if you're taking off and someone's coming in to land, if you're taking your time, they'll tend to tell you to get a move on. Anyway, that's flying. Back in the day, I did play Microsoft Flight Sim. Mostly as a practice for real flying. I mean, it's not entirely accurate, but it's close enough that with mods you can find the plane you're flying. All of the runways are there, even if they're not accurate. The runway's accurate, the airfield not so much. That was a funny thing. I used to fly out of what was it called? Stapleford airfield, just inside the M25 on the northeast side of London, and there was a good representation of the airfield in Microsoft Flight Sim insofar as the 2 runways. What wasn't modelled was the huge great tree at one end of the east-west runway. So you had to go round that when you were landing, because otherwise you were a little bit too close. And the trees outside of the airfields land owned by somebody else. So obviously over the course of 50 years, nobody was able to persuade the landowner that the tree was a little bit of a problem for airfield navigation. And then the other thing that was wrong was Stapleford has a little wooden shed where the guy on the radio sits. So air traffic control is the guy in the shack. In Microsoft Flight Sim, they had a control tower. Which, yeah, way over budget. Stapleford was not a wealthy airfield, although they did run a couple of twin prop planes out. And as you took off heading south, you could actually make out London. Most of the time, London was a black dome because of all the soot from the cabs and the buses. And if you were heading north out of the airfield, the airfield dropped heading north. So south end of the airfield was higher than the north end. That's not necessarily a problem. It doesn't assist in your takeoff speed or anything like that because the propeller's the thing pulling you through the air. However, just over the other side of the road that runs by the airport, there is a ditch and then a solid climb up the other side to probably about 500 feet. So when you take off from the runway, you're climbing. You've got to climb quite hard because at that point the ground's coming up to meet you if you don't. And at the top of the hill on the other side of the valley, there were some power lines. So you kind of don't want to hit those either. So, you know, it wasn't a challenging airfield, but you needed to know the intricacies of it because it could cause people who didn't fly out of there some surprises. Now, my flight instructors frequently told me it's probably one of the best airfields to fly out of because it's in a valley. It's quite sheltered. It's surrounded by woodland on some sides. So wind at ground level can be quite low, but it's got the terrain. And obviously trees can make things difficult, especially if the propeller stops going round. Because you need to find somewhere nice and flat to put an aeroplane, and if what's underneath you is trees and you're only at 200-300 feet, you don't have a lot of time to react to, oh my goodness. But the runways were short, so you had to be really accurate getting the plane on the ground. And that's something when we moved to America, I flew out of Camarillo, which has I would consider a huge runway. And that, I think they landed some Courier jets there. Nothing in the wide-bodied range, but they did land jets there. So it was a good long runway and a very wide runway. And so initially I was counting if I can get it on the ground, it's a good landing. But eventually I got to the no, I know I can land a plane on something much smaller, much more accurately, and I don't need to use half the runway for my my braking. So I started getting very focused landing at Camarillo, so that, yes, I could put the plane down on the numbers every time, and I could be departing the runway frequently at the very first taxiway, more commonly at the second one, or not more common, less commonly at the second one, but I was always off the runway by the second taxiway, whereas and sometimes I could hit the first one. And that became my goal. I mean, yeah, if you're landing a jet, you're going to be leaving the runway on the fifth taxiway. But I want to be down and off because I know I can do it, because I flew at a very small airfield in it originally. And I didn't need the full length of that runway either. And if I didn't land it on the numbers, I was in danger of landing on the grass at the side of the runway. They were that small. Anyway, that's flying. I haven't done flying for years, computer-based or otherwise. I mean, I'm less inclined to buy something like Microsoft Flight Sim these days, because I'm not actively flying a plane for recreation, and it's been 24 years, probably 23 years since I was last in a cockpit flying a plane. And that last flight was probably the one out of Santa Barbara, whatever it was. And the problem was, when I started in Camarillo, I flew from one of the flight schools there, and we got there in '99, so I've probably flew out of that airfield for 18 months. And then the main flight instructor quit. And so they had a couple of part-timers, but they couldn't fit in my schedule. So that was fine, okay. There was another flight school at Camarillo, so I transferred over to that one and flew until September of 2001. Then private traffic was grounded for, I want to say, over 6 months. And in that time, the flight school lost access to all of their learner-rated planes. And what a lot of people, or what a lot of wealthy people will do, who just, I want a plane to fly around with, I don't need anything big and fancy. They will get a plane that is rated for training purposes. So, it's cheap to insure, it's cheap to run. It doesn't have anything fancy on it, fixed undercarriage, fixed propeller. And then they rent it out to the flight school. So the flight school will pay them money. Now, any plane that's used for flying lessons has a higher service requirement or servicing requirement than a private plane does. So I don't know what the numbers are, but maybe if you own a plane, you have to get the engine serviced every 2,000 hours. if it's used at a flight school, it has to be serviced every 1,200 hours. So the servicing costs are going to be more because you have to service the plane more frequently. But the rental that the flight school's paying you covers that that cost, and also gives you a little bit of income on the side, kind of like renting out a home. The rent covers repairs, taxes, and gives you a little bit of money left over. So anyway, most airplanes at flight schools, at least at that time, were leased to them by the airplane owner. Well, 2001 September, the flight schools closed, so those owners weren't getting flight school income, because they only get income when the plane's being used, and the plane's not being used because nobody's allowed to fly anything. So a lot of them terminated their contract with the flight school, because then they could go back to the normal the non-flight school servicing rates and insurance rates. So owning the plane got cheaper, but they weren't getting income from it. Some of them probably sold their planes, to be perfectly honest. If I can't rent it to a flight school, why am I flying a learner plane when I've got the skills to fly something a little bit more fancy? But anyway, so the flight school ended up with no planes to teach people in, so they were in dire straits. So it's like, we're not doing flight schooling stuff anymore, and we're not sure we're going to be around for many more months when the airspace did open. So I did take one lesson down at Santa Monica, and I think they had the advantage that they were Santa Monica has the Pan American flight school. Pan American used to be an airline that you would fly transatlantic as a passenger, but their commercial business went bust, but their flight schools were still open. So I think this was still one of the reasons they still had access to trainee-rated aeroplanes, was because anybody who wanted to become an airline pilot would go to the Pan American flight school, and if you had 0 hours in an aeroplane, they needed to take you from yes, I can walk on the ground, to, oh, I know how to fly a small aeroplane. And their course was such that you would learn how to fly. You would expand your ticket to include multi-engine, jet plane, blah, 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 and slowly work your way, or, be able to, in one flight school, learn everything you need to become a full-fledged airline pilot. Now, I didn't have the desire to become a full-fledged airline pilot. I just had lots of money, and flying was fun. But, so, as I said, I flew out of there once. It was horrible to get to from where I lived, and I didn't enjoy the experience of trying to land at the airfield with 10-mile-an-hour crosswind, so I just said, I'm kind of done with this. Plus, I got relocated to Texas. And when I got to Texas, I never took it up again. So 2005, I think I got to Texas in 2005. Maybe 2004, but yeah. I flew once in 2002 after September 2001, and then I haven't got into a pilot seat since then. And it would be quite costly to get back into a pilot seat. I am obviously 23 years older, so the medical requirements are quite a bit more severe. I would have to, yeah, I haven't flown an aeroplane for 24 years, so I would have to show competence in being able to fly a plane without any input from a flight instructor, aside from go over there, turn left, whatever. And so that today, just getting back to where I was 24 years ago, would probably cost in the region of $1,500, maybe more. I haven't kept up to how much it costs to lease a plane for an hour or rent a plane for an hour, plus the fuel involved. So yeah, that's a lot of expense for something that's just something I do for fun. And then on top of that, I would still have to take the ground exam, which is a few hundred, the practical exam, which is a few hundred because you have to rent the plane and pay for the fuel and pay for the examiner, before I could get a full private pilot license and be able to turn up at an airport and say, here's my license, can I go and fly one of your planes, please? So yeah, that pastime, it had its day, but I'm kind of done with that. I know I can fly a plane. It is